Okay, so today we're looking at the block, I guess. Now, I don't even well, to start with, I guess we'll look at the cylinders of the ones I've taken out. Now, you can sort of kind of see that glossy finish there. Well, there's still a crosshatch there, and there's still oil, which is kind of a good thing. It means it's retaining the oil, especially considering it's been sitting a long while like this. But you'll notice that there's quite a bit of carbon around there. Now that's going to get taken out when the block gets acid bathed, and then it's going to get rehoned because different rings have different recommended hone grits. So Wiseco uses chromoly rings, and they recommend a 320 grit hone. So that's what we're going to go with on this. We're looking at the pistons, and you can see that there's some of this stuff is caked a bit. And turns out I had a little bit of a gasket leak. There was coolant. You use a special test paper, and you rub it on here, and if it goes green, well, it tells you that you've got coolant. Well, there's a little bit of coolant in the combustion chamber, so I don't know what happened with the head gasket. This cylinder is pretty much in the same condition. They all seem to be in the same condition. Now, a little bit of an observation time, and by the way, the camera is on a stand, but I am moving it around so we can look at stuff. You'll notice a little slit right there. Okay, but maybe you can't see. I'm not sure. You'll notice that the slit doesn't go all the way down. These sleeves have to come out as one piece. That was not made aware. Well, in my time on the forum, that has never been strictly said that this is all these sleeves are one piece. So when you go to like a Darton sleeve, they become individual sleeves that are pressed in and then lapped. This line here is supposed to be free and clear because it allows coolant, I'm assuming, to go around to this side. I don't know how effective that is, but seems to work well enough. You can see from here a bit the crankshaft down there, and we can go around this side. And here we're looking at the bottom of the crankshaft. Now you can see, apparently, I'm not going to get this Dura tested, but apparently this is a forged crank. It would be a cast forge, but apparently it's still a forged crank. You'll notice that there's still a lot of casting marks. If you guys can see that, but there's a lot of casting marks left in here, and that's just excess weight. Now, you don't just shave this stuff off, okay? This crank was balanced with all this garbage on here. So if you want to lighten your crankshaft, you can take all these casting marks out, but then you have to go and get it rebalanced, okay? Best bet is don't touch your crank, okay? Don't modify your crank. Lots of different people, I guess, have said that. Don't modify the crank. Get it rebalanced to your new rotating assembly, or to your new pistons and conrods, but don't lighten the crank. And when I get the crank when I send it out to go get balanced, I'll talk with my engine builder and see what he thinks can be done, because this crank is about 36 pounds, so that's quite a bit of rotating weight there. But I'm maintaining a dual mass flywheel, which is also about 30 pounds, so I don't want to take too much weight off of this. Just in my experience and how I've built engines in the past, we don't really modify the crank, especially in diesels, because yeah, you consume energy moving a heavier crank, and pro racer engine builders will all say the same thing: lighter is better. And for all I know, they're completely correct. I'm just not going to modify the crank, because this isn't going to be going into a strictly speaking race car. Things to make note of is your bearing surface. You want to make sure that that's not oxidized or covered in rust. So when you're taking this apart, and if you have to stop, put a little bit of oil on here just to protect it. If you send your block off to get acid bathed, which I recommend, it gets rid of all the gunk, completely cleans it out, then I do highly recommend scraping all of your gasket material off. Just right here, kind of sort of see it. All that should come off, because it's just you want it as clean as possible, so all the prep work you do in advance, you know. Now this seal here is for your ladder frame. Your ladder frame is structural, but it is not torsional, if you get what I mean. Your ladder frame bolts to the bottom of the block, but your rotating assembly is not, strictly speaking, supported by it. Okay, your ladder frame makes for a stronger block, but it does not affect this. Okay, and your seal along your ladder frame, like your gasket sealing surface, is not as important as, say, your head. Your head seal is very, very important that that's done right, and that is smooth, and that your clearances are all in line. Okay. You'll see in your shop manual that your head has to be within a certain tolerance. Okay, so flat. Okay, and what you do is you have a straight, a machinist straight edge. Okay, that's machined perfectly flat along the one side. So you take your machinist's straight edge. We'll just call it straight edge from now on. You take your straight edge, and you've got a pattern in your manual that you follow, and you use a feeler gauge, which is one of these, and you try to fit this underneath. Okay, and you try to move it along. Now, spec is 0.002 of an inch. Okay, I start off one stage thinner, so 0.0015, and I start with there, and if I can get that one to go through at any spots, then I know that there's to use this one. But doing the head, there was only one small section that this wouldn't fit through, but this one would, which means my head is still flat to tolerance, because it's the next stage past, which is in here somewhere. Here's 0.025. This wouldn't fit through. Okay, and if this doesn't fit through, but this one does, then it's still technically within spec. But we want to be, optimally, we want to be less than spec, so tighter tolerances. But just a word of note, I buy new feeler gauges pretty much every build, because I don't, it's probably a waste of money, but just to make sure that I've got one that has not been worn thin. Okay, I just use a new one, and they're about $7 for a 26 rung. Okay, and if you ever drop your feeler gauge and it lands on this piece of paper or metal feeler, I throw them out because I don't trust that they're spec anymore. And I always use my vernier caliper and or slide caliper and verify the thickness before relying on this, just because you never know if it was actually made to spec, so you don't want to put too much stock in something until you know what it's going to be. And make sure that you keep them lubricated because they do come oiled, or they're supposed to, and you want to make sure that they stay lubricated so they slide on each other right, rather than grind themselves down. So you don't need to do the bottom of the block with a feeler gauge to find out if it's square, but you do need to do the top of the block, and you do need to do the mating surface of the head. Okay, so where the block and the head sandwich together, those two surfaces, those are the ones you need to make sure that are perfectly as flat as possible. Okay. If you follow the correct guide, if you've never overheated your head, then more than likely you won't have any issues if you follow the correct unbolting pattern, which we saw in the last video. That's just something, I guess, to look at. There is a specific bolt pattern for taking out your main end caps, which are these things here. They squish the crankshaft to the block. So make sure that you follow that pattern, and that when they get retorqued, do not reuse these. Okay, never reuse these. Grab something here. Alright, so this is a piston that I took out. Now, I'm not going to reuse it, but it does have its bearing still in it, and I keep it lubricated, and I have actually no idea what I've decided what I'm going to do with these yet. But this is your conrod, just in case nobody knows. Okay, conrod. In here is your bearing, and this is what everybody talks about when they talk about end cap, and this is your bolt, your end cap bolts. Okay. Now, these bolts apparently are the weak sauce of the whole 2009 to 2012 2.0 Ts. Okay. Now, rather long, but apparently these are the weak spot. Now, I don't know how well this is going to show up in the video, but looking at the bolt, you actually can see a little bit of a stretch right in there. Yeah, it's not showing up very well, but either way, you can see a little bit of a stretch, okay? You never, ever, ever, I cannot stress this enough, out of every bolt in the engine to never reuse these, okay? Now the Genesis end caps are indexed, which means they have little markings here to tell you that this cap has to go match up with that marking. Okay, they have little numbers and letters engraved into them, as well as a serial number in here. Okay. On the other side, it's completely normal, I guess, clean. Now this, the one thing I noticed is these end caps are cracked. Okay, they are not cut; they are cracked apart. Oh, and that little green mark there—that's your bearing. When we talk about bearing colors, you'll see that little color right there. That's dyed into the steel. That's your bearing, or into the bearing, I should say. I think they're steel bearings. that's what we're talking about for the bearing color. Now, going back to these end caps, they're cracked, and what that means is that basically they're broken off of the end of the crank, and that creates a certain texture or groove of the two metals, and that allows them to get basically as close as possible, give or take a bit, a couple of microns. But when they're all done up and they're done up correctly, you'll see that there's a little line there. The more I tighten this, the more that line disappears. And when it's fully torqued down, that line is completely invisible. Okay? Like, you can barely see it on the camera now, but if I release the tension off, the torque off of this, you'll see that line. Maybe not. Oh, can't really. Either way, when you have yours apart, the more you tighten this, you'll see a little line. See, there's you see that little line that just formed? Well, that's oil squishing out of there. Now your pistons, I wasn't aware of this, but your piston skirts are actually coated, and you can see where it's worn out. Now that's perfectly normal. The coating is not designed to be there for the life of the piston. It is designed as basically a break-in protection agent. Your milling on the side here, that should be free of wear. Okay, your like, this is your top fire ring, this is your second firing ring, this is your oil ring. Okay, your below this first fire ring should be as clean as possible, which mine is a little heated, and there's a little bit of oil in there. But above this ring, you'd like it as clean as possible as well, but if you have a lot of carbon, like right there, build up between your first and second firing rings, then that's indicative of oil consumption. But looking at the bottom ring here, which is the oil ring or oil spring, there is, between this second and the oil ring, there is pretty much nothing. Okay, which tells me that the oil is actually coming from the top and getting pushed past the first ring and getting into that second ring spot, not coming up. Okay, that means my oil ring is fine, but more than likely all of this oil damage is caused by when my main bearing seal let go and my engine hoovered like 2 liters of oil through it. So that's probably where all this came from. This in here is your wrist pin, okay, and there is a little spring in there that holds your wrist pin in place, but it just prevents it from falling out. It's not supposed to be in there tight, okay. And your conrod can actually move side to side on your wrist pin. Okay, that's perfectly normal as well. Now, people are saying, or I've seen people say, that your factory pistons, your weak sauce is this, the retainer, the casting for the wrist pin is not all that strong. And if this was a forged piston, I would say it'd be perfectly fine and it wouldn't be an issue. But it's not a forged piston. It's a cast piston. So this could have been, instead of milling this down here for whatever reason, they could have left that in there, kept it a little bit thicker. That would have been nice. But overall, actually, I'm not all that, like, for a cast system and being as inexpensive as it is, I'm actually not all that upset by Hyundai's selection for this first build. Alright, we are at the point of the build when the engine is almost completely disassembled. The only things left on the block are the oil squirters, which will be remaining through the next process. Now that this has been completely disassembled, what's going to happen is it's going to get acid bath, clean up the outside of it, and clean out the. It's going to get port washed, which is they're going to run acid wash through all the ports and everything, and then it's going to get the torque plate mounted onto it, the head studs installed, and the cylinders are going to be honed, not bored. The reason I'm honing and not boring or going up to a 86.5 millimeter bore or 87 millimeter bore is because my cylinder walls are actually in really, really good condition, surprisingly. So I don't actually feel the need to enlarge them, and thus I'm not going to. This next process probably won't be documented, as I'm having another company be doing the washing of the block and the honing, and you guys will see the torque plate and all that stuff in the next video. So I won't be covering it in this. At this point in time, there's not all that much to talk about actually, because we've just disassembled the entire block. Well, I guess I could say the actual casting, like engine casting, is actually really, really light. I think the crankshaft actually weighs more than the rest of this does. The crankshaft, I'll grab, is in really, really good condition. So we will definitely be reusing it. And since I'm not doing a stroke at this point in time, probably ever actually, it's basically the perfect crank. Now, I guess next after this, and after the engine gets back from being cleaned, we will start discussing rotating balance and stuff like that. Possibly also we will be discussing the head. Now, I'm not going to be modifying the head in any way, shape, or form. I'd really like to do valve springs, but that's just not going to happen. But we will take a look at it and answer some questions. Now, by the time this video is released, this is probably already back. So if you have any questions or things you'd like to specifically see of the block, or measured or anything like that, let me know, and I will do my best to make sure that it is done, but be quick about it, because eventually the block will start the process of being rebuilt. That's pretty much about it. I mean,